Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This episode is very important for climate change and global warming. And we are trying to create awareness in developing nations, especially in Asia Pacific. Yes, we are working with Africa, we are working with Europe and North America, but we want to improve the lives of the human being. And we have our expert panelist. Last 1 year they are supporting World Talent Economy Forums, and already it's actually accepted by academy, corporations, and governments. So all of the organization, those who are connecting with World Talent Economy Forum, they are really happy. And I just want to share, even today I get a very good experience from southern part of India. They are very interested about our work, about the case study. Even World Talent Economy Forum, we are distributing case study to the Malaysian students. So we are increasing our audience. So your valuable thoughts and everything will be really helpful for our youth community, our policymakers, and for our business organizations. Yes, our major focus is micro initiative. We do not want to jump on the macro initiative, but definitely the government, the academia, and the corporation, we want to make a better ecosystem. So I directly want to go for the Mr. Paul. How do you want to analyze climate change and global warming issues, and how do you want to share your experience as an activist?
Well, I just want to emphasize the points that, and they're not yet obvious to everybody, but we're in a real climate emergency. We've run out of time. We're getting real significant detrimental effects all around the planet. I could go on for hours and hours talking about all the different events, like extreme weather events. I mean, North America just experienced this massive heat wave. People are calling it heat dome. A lot of the media are calling it a heat dome without referring to climate change. But a study just came out. There's a lot of scientists that have formed a group that look at so-called attribution studies, so that very quickly after an event happens, like this heat dome, they can publish a paper, a peer-reviewed journal paper, tying this event directly to climate change. And they said that there is basically zero chance that this massive heat wave in North America, which killed many people. I mean, the numbers are coming out. I think in British Columbia, they're saying there were something like 700 or 800 excess deaths due to the heat wave. So it's very easy to get those excess deaths. I mean, all you need to do is get the accurate numbers from different morgues and total them, and look at the change over time. And during the heat wave, the numbers went way up by 700-800 according to the study. And I mean, we're experiencing all of these extreme weather events that are really disrupting societies, but at the moment, it's in one place or another place in the world. Often there's simultaneous events, and where we're heading to a much warmer world is going to be worldwide. These events are going to be too numerous for anybody to just keep track of. So, we've jumped over a cliff basically with our society, our fossil fuel emissions, and we have to do everything we can to try to claw our way back up to the cliff. Maybe we're hanging on by our fingernails onto the edge of the cliff right now, and we're going to continue to go over and get worse and worse extreme weather events and consequences around the world. And I guess I encourage the listeners and the audience and everybody to think whenever they see some event occurring, you could usually find a connection to climate change. So I'll just give one example to keep it short, and that's the collapse of the condominium in Florida. So basically, sea level is rising and the coasts are subsiding in parts of Florida, and the rock underneath is limestone, and limestone can become dissolved by water. So as the sea level rises, the water is percolating into the granite and solid bedrock underneath buildings on the coast of Florida, creating basically Swiss cheese, and these buildings are subsiding and eventually collapsing. And we've seen the first case of this happen, and it won't be the last. There will be many. People in Florida have thought up to now, well, sea level rise occasionally, is a nuisance because they occasionally get what is called clear sky flooding, where you get a king tide and the water just washes onto the streets and around the bases of buildings. And people thought it was a nuisance before, trying to get out of their buildings, but now they'll realize that their buildings are under threat for collapse because the foundations are being eroded away by the rising sea. And yeah, so there's all kinds of implications. Look at any particular event that happens, price rise in a certain food, or just about it's sort of like a fun game, and it's not that difficult to play. You could look at any particular event happening in the world and probably somehow, not directly but indirectly, maybe several orders up, relate it to climate change. I mean, it's very clear that these connections, climate change is affecting us in many, many ways that are obvious and that are non-obvious, that are more hidden. So anyway, thank you for doing another one of your great shows. I
Thank
always
you.
enjoy
Thank you.
attending.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. Jamesid, how do you want to analyze today's topic, and what kind of good projects we can do for solving these climate change issues?
Thank you, Sharif, for another show on this critical topic, because I say that we really needed to start yesterday to try to find the solutions, and yesterday's gone. So today is maybe too late, but we got to get started as soon as we can with the urgency that's necessary to meet an emergency situation. And, I'm not being melodramatic here. I'm just telling you like it is. It's really happening. And what we talked about, what Paul talked about the heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, well, what I was studying, the recommendations were to anticipate enough climate change, go to the Pacific Northwest, the upper Midwest, or New England. These were probably the places that would have water and survive climate change to the global warming phenomena the best. Now, what just happened in the Pacific Northwest? It was unbelievable. And is this tied to climate change? Yes, absolutely it is. The Arctic temperatures and the sub-Saharan temperatures are creating little gaps that are interfering with the jet stream that would normally move these heat patterns out along the way. And so all of it's interrelated. So all of it is complicated, and it's not easy to understand. It's not easy to explain. So this is what's keeping us from taking action, because we can talk about these things with complicated and recommend you should move to the Pacific Northwest. And then all of a sudden you see this news about the what's going on there, and you go, oh, well, nobody knows anything, so might as well give up. No, we can't afford to give up. But this is the question. This is what's the nature of science: is you postulate, you test, and then you reassess. And this is, we're learning more as we go along. But don't be discouraged if we don't know it all, because however much we know, we only know a little. And when we take that humility into account, then we realize that we can make changes, but let's not think that we've got this figured out or solved. So the solutions may have to be adaptable. For more information, as much as the environment feeds us back in more information, we have to adjust. We have to be nimble and quick. We cannot be doing things the old way anymore. We've run out of time. And this is, we talked about what happens in Miami. What's going on in Chicago? Chicago is a great city with great problems, terrible problems. But the Lake Michigan, it's built on, Chicago is built on a swamp. And Lake Michigan's is rising and falling at extreme levels now. And so this is causing great stress on Chicago. So this is, you're telling us we move to the Midwest. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is Chicago. Well, Chicago's going to be affected too. So we don't have this all figured out. But do not be discouraged. Do not let this discourage you from taking action. Start with yourself. What can I do to minimize my impact on the environment? We put, maybe not everyone has a home, but if you have a home, maybe solar panels are part of it. If you have a car, you drive a car, maybe an electric car is part of it. So if everybody does a little, the effects will be large. So these are the types of things. Start with yourself and then influence those around you. People in your sphere of influence, try and change them. And then they have a sphere of influence. And then that change keeps growing. And who knows when it'll stop. So just be optimistic that we can handle the situations, but also have a sense of urgency about this. This is not something that's going to go away. And you will find arguments. There's lies, damn lies in statistics, and you will find people arguing statistics and saying, well, the global average temperature hasn't changed that much, that dramatically. So poo-poo on this idea of climate change. However, if you talk about the extremes are getting wilder. Like Michigan is going shallower, and then higher, and the tides are coming higher and then lower, and these are extreme weather patterns that we haven't seen. These are not 500-year phenomena that are happening every year. This is like crazy extremes that we cannot predict. We don't know the next one, where it's going to land, but we know something's coming. So start with yourself. Thanks very much, Sharif. This is a tremendous problem. Tremendous solutions that aren't behind it.
Thank you. Professor Donalds, how do you want to analyze today's topic? And specifically, if you want to refer some research and argument about this climate change.
Well, I want to take a perspective that has to kind of jump out of the United States a little bit, because I right now, the country that's going to be most affected by climate change is Bangladesh. And in 1998, they had a cyclone that was the worst anywhere ever in history. I think 140 million people were affected by it, which is quite a lot of people. And the Bangladesh is, in America, we have a tendency to think of Bangladesh as just like, I don't know, a big version of Calcutta or something like that. But that's wrong. Bangladesh is actually advanced to the point where they're a medium country. They're not completely a developed country, but they've developed and are developing. And the Dutch got together with Bangladesh and created a Delta plan. It's interesting for people who don't know, and I mean, of course, the people in Bangladesh know this, but people in even other parts of Asia may not realize that Bangladesh is the delta for the Ganges River, and 80% of Bangladesh is a delta for various rivers. So it's very at risk. If there's more water and cyclones and things like that, it's a place that's kind of dangerous. But the government of Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh work together, and another more recent cyclone, the damage was considerably less severe, which is wonderful. I mean, the country is stepping up to the plate. However, again, I'm using them as an example, and I can expand this into other countries. This is an example just because they're the country that's most affected right now, so they're a good place to start. At least 10 to 20% of the country is destined to be underwater by not too long in the future, 2100. And it's also the most densely populated country in the world. So all of the places that are going to be underwater are places where people live. And I think it's important to realize that we've passed the point where we're going to be able to stop it, as James said, and Paul both said that the train is heading towards where the tunnel should be. And so we're going to have to dig the tunnel very, very, very quickly, or the train's going to crash into a mountain. And so as individuals, one of the things I was thinking after the last show, I was giving this considerable thought, and I realized that the money is in the developed world, the very highly developed world. So the United States, Europe, other countries. Malaysia is a relatively wealthy country. I mean, people come from all over to go to Malaysia because there's more work there than a lot of places. But still, I'll get back to Malaysia and back to Bangladesh. Their problem is the same as what Paul was talking about when he's talking about Florida. The people aren't going to be able to live in certain places anymore. They're going to have to move. And we need to work. I mean, the developed world needs to help. And every country like Bangladesh is being helped by the developed world. Their Delta Plan 2100 was done in concert with the Dutch. So the Dutch are actually helping Bangladesh. So we need to do this everywhere. And everywhere in the world, we're going to have to start with a managed retreat. But when somebody moves, they're going to move to someplace else where there's probably people living. And I'm going to repeat the thing I've said many times, which is an article in Science about 2 months ago, saying that the best thing that you can do is just talk to people about it, because viral information about climate change it actually works. It helps. It changes people's attitude. And one of the biggest changes we're going to have to make is to be able to start talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to allow the hundreds of millions of people who are going to have to leave their homes to find a place to go to. And we've got to start doing that like now. And so I think that's what I want to say about climate change right now.
Thank you, Mr. Donalds. Madam Ali, how do you want to analyze the climate change issues? And if you share some of your experience from Europe, it will be really, really helpful for us.
Well, for us, since 2020, actually, there was a massive heat wave here as well. So even in the UK, which is a moderate climate, there's quite extreme things happening that weren't happening before. So I think, and also, over the last 10 or 15 years, this area has been severely flooded as well. So I think the thing is that even though we're, climate-wise, we're a moderate country, that it's kind of going to affect us all really. So, and I think the only solution really is to live more sustainably and be more conscious about the decisions we make. So that, it's kind of on a local level, a local level we're aware, but also kind of on a kind of global level, there's also a consciousness about what we do too. So, and I think the difficulty is that kind of switch from relying on fossil fuels to other things. So we live in a rural area and we heavily rely on our car because public transport isn't really dependable, and essentially you get quite isolated if you didn't have your own transport as well. So I think fundamentals, but I think things like there's a lot of housing development that's happening at the moment. And when they build new houses, they can make passive houses that retain their own energy and didn't need any power. So I think the thing is, if they looked ahead and used the innovations they've got now instead of doing things the way they always have done, that they innovated when they did anything new, it would have a demonstrable effect, kind of on the long term, really. So. But I know my brother-in-law works in the petrochemical industry, and he's just about to go to China to build a new plant as well. So my concern really is that big corporations like the petrochemical industry aren't stopping anytime soon, and the governments are continually financing them to do what they shouldn't be doing. And essentially then they blame us, the public, and think that that our behaviours are the things that need to change. But the critical change needs to come from them, not us. And essentially, until we stop what they're doing, their input and the scale of their impact is massive. And and even when we got locked down, one of the critical things that changed as well is we stopped flying. There was flights stopped, and the use of planes, as lovely as it is to go abroad, that has a massive effect. So I think the thing is that lockdowns made us realise, even here, the thing that stopped that was really interesting is because we were home based, so we were working from home and school was online. The thing that woke us up in the morning wasn't the ignition of our cars, but birdsong. And essentially, it's shown that, you know, there's a lot of people can be work-based, and then there's at home, and then there's more life-work balance. So I think the thing is that one of the things that the whole experience for 2020 has shown us is there's different ways of doing things. But the big corporates need to be held responsible, and the only people that are going to make them be held responsible are governments. And it's not in the government's interest to do that, is it? Because they get so much tax from them, or it's because I just think there's such an alignment between the things that are going wrong and the way the government supports them, that we need to question governments around the world and what they're doing and why they're doing things the way they are, because things fundamentally need to change and everyone knows them, but the people in power need to be the ones that enable that to happen. And and that's what we need to demand as a people, on a global basis, not just on a local basis. So so for me, it's a fundamental thing that's quite flawed, because until governments make people accountable that are impacted, the plastic pollution in the sea is crazy. And the thing is that could stop if they just I think they should just draw a line and say you need to stop plastic production, not wait for 30 years until then kind of let it peter out. So I think you need to do things much more quickly. And I don't see why you can't do it quickly, but obviously there's kind of ramifications and stopping industries, and that hits people's livelihoods, but there must be a way through, and it's down to innovators to think differently and put those innovations in place so that they are, so that people use them in new developments now, not just have developers that do things as they always have done. So there should be really incentives to make those things happen. So for me, it's those corporations need to be held to account.
Thank you. Mr. Paul, actually, like climate change happening, what do you think? This climate change actually man-made, or it's a natural process? As well as sometimes many youth community, they try to understand about the data sources from NASA. If you help them to understand some procedure, how they collect data, and how they uh, uh, visualize this kind of data and how effective it is, if you share your thought in that particular area, maybe it will be very helpful for our students and the youth community.
Yeah, with climate change, of course, the climate has always changed on this planet. What is different now with the human effect, the anthropogenic effect, is the rate of change of climate. So, what would take thousands or tens of thousands of years to occur before in the past is now happening in less than 100 years, in decades even, and we can actually see changes year to year now. The rate of change of the greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere, the temperature rise, the increase in extreme weather events, the increase in ocean temperatures, the increase in loss of biodiversity and mass extinctions and things. These things are happening almost, there's stuff happening every single day. I mean, that heat wave, the heat dome I was talking about, and it's really annoying that the media just calls it a heat dome without referring to climate change whatsoever. They tend to do that. They tend to avoid saying the words climate change when they jump through hoops trying to avoid saying that. But that particular heat wave, it killed literally, it heated the ocean waters on the coastlines, and there was mass mortality of oysters and little sea creatures, just because the water got literally too hot. It literally almost boiled them alive, and mass mortalities on Canada's western coast, and often there'll be mass mortality events of various during when there's massive tropical storms coming ashore, when there's some other extreme weather events in other places. I mean, we talk often about the effects on humans, but the effects on the biosphere and on plants and animals is enormous and often not talked about. I mean, massive hailstorms, for example, in Europe, and in massive tornadoes in parts of China just in the last few days. Like F4 sized tornadoes, massive tornadoes, just tearing up infrastructure in towns and cities in China just in the last few days. There's just so much going on that it's hard for any one person to keep track of it all. And when it happens every day, it becomes sort of the normal in our brains. Okay, so any one specific event then has less significance than it would have before. One of the things about the human thinking and human brain is that we very quickly adapt to what we think is normal, and there's nothing normal. There's no new normal because we're undergoing abrupt climate change, and abrupt just means that we're getting huge spikes in events occurring. We have this forcing of greenhouse gases that is causing warming, but oftentimes the rate of warming suddenly far exceeds the rate of the driving force, and we get an abrupt sort of change, a jump, a surprise. It's like you're in a canoe and it's tipping. You can stay in the canoe within limits of tipping, but you exceed some threshold and suddenly you're in the water. You're in a new state, right? So this is what's happening to the planet. We're tipping and tipping, and the planet's trying to, put brakes on it, but the forcing, eventually the tipping, brings us to an abrupt new state, like in the canoe case, ending up in the water. In the Arctic sea ice case, suddenly having no Arctic sea ice at the end of a summer. No ice at all in covering the ocean in the Arctic. And of course, when that happens in this new state, then the warming in the Arctic will greatly accelerate. In terms of collecting data, we have loads of instrumentation. Of course, we've got the weather stations all around the planet, and they're calibrated so that, as often with a lot of the weather stations, they were in rural areas before years ago, and with industrial development and cities growth, some of the weather stations are becoming sort of encapsulated within city limits, and there's urban heat island effects that can increase the temperature. So those are all calibrated for and corrected for. But we have a lot of data coming, global data coming from satellites, with various passive and active sensors. The passive sensors, they're measuring things in the visible wavelengths or in the infrared wavelengths. Passively, there's no signal being sent out from the satellite. It's just a big detector, sensitive detectors on board, versus something called like the radar sats, where they shoot out a radar signal, bounce it off the surface, and measure the reflectance. And we can tell all kinds of things from the satellite data. And of course, it's very important to ground truth the satellite data. So what you do is you go out in the field and you take measurements in a certain region. You compare the numbers you get to the numbers that are coming out of the satellite, and those are used to sort of ground truth the satellite data. So there's all kinds of different variables that you can measure, and both from satellite, from ground, from ships, from aircraft, and things like that. So and then you try to correlate and connect all the data to lower the uncertainty. I mean, there's always going to be uncertainty in any measurement that we make. That's why we repeat measurements, and we do it over large. Try to collect as much data as possible, and then that data becomes available to scientists worldwide. I mean, that's one of the things that's happening. More and more peer-reviewed scientific papers. The authors actually have they publish the paper, and then often there's supplementary data available online connected with that paper, and often the scientists more and more often are now they're putting the entire database that they based their paper on online. So anybody with technical ability could go and look at that data and analyze it themselves. And they might want to analyze it and look for something different other than what was in the original study, right? I mean, that's kind of how science works. So the idea is to have all of the data online that could be analyzed by any person with the skills to do that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. James, if you just analyze one of the specific point that climate change impact on human being, especially what will be the possibilities, because for the COVID already we are suffering a lot. So if the next challenge come on climate change, how will like create some impact of the human being?
Well, Sharif, I want to congratulate you on your overall aspect of trying to get industry, government, and academia to cooperate in ways that they have not necessarily in the past, because I think a lot of this it requires all three to work in balance. And this is the question that we are really wrestling with. The Earth is out of balance. And how do we restore the balance? And what is the effect on the human beings? Well, eventually it will be an extinction level event. So, I can't be more dramatic than that. That is what we are facing. Because as Paul pointed out, there's always been climate change, but it's happened at a pace that people could adapt to. Now, our lungs cannot change, cannot evolve, cannot adapt to the air that we're breathing in. When have we seen this? Since the dawn of the industrial age. In London, there was a fog because we were pouring pollutants into the air, it was like drinking pea soup. And so what happened? The rich moved away. The labor workers had to stay and had to breathe it and had to suffer, sometimes die. And this is what's going to happen if we take no action. The people that can will move to where it's still livable, where there's still water that's available to drink, and not toxic water, which will be left to the poor to drink, if they have even that. So this is the effect that's going to happen at first. The wealthy will be okay for a longer period of time than the poor, the people that have no choice but to stay where they are. And when we build walls to keep them there, this is what we're going to accelerate is the people that have fewer resources will suffer the most. The people with more resources will postpone the suffering, but the suffering will reach them. Because as we were just talking about, we said, oh, go to the Pacific Northwest. Whoa, what just happened in the Pacific Northwest? Move to Chicago. Oh, what's happening to Chicago? So we can't predict what's going to be the sustainable place to live. And they're going to shrink. And the uninhabitable places on the planet will continue to grow. So we need to learn to cooperate in different ways, because it doesn't matter what country you're from. It doesn't matter what language you speak. We're all in this together. And until we learn to cooperate as if we are all in this together, which we actually are, then we will come up short in addressing the climatic and catastrophic consequences of the actions since the dawn of the industrial age. And as Paul pointed out, it's not just gradually changing. The change is accelerated, and it's continuing to accelerate. And it's worse. It's more influential than Morse's law of the speed of the computers and the evolution of chip technology. No, man, the global change is happening so rapidly that we're able to deny it for a long period of time. Oh, it's just a fad. Or it happens all the time in history. If you go back 10,000 years, there was an ice age. Well, yeah, but this is different because humans have made a different influence on the planet. We're pouring so much into the atmosphere. There's so much into our rivers. We have islands of plastic in the Pacific now. When did that ever happen? 10,000 years ago? No. So human impact has been immensely important in changing our atmosphere. And if we do it enough, we'll have a Venus effect, and the planet will be uninhabitable for human beings. So what if we accelerate our adaptation, our evolution by using technology? Instead of our lungs can't adapt, let's replace our lungs with instruments that can breathe the now toxic air. And let's change our eyes, because our eyes can now see through this impenetrable field of vision that is the climate has changed so dramatically we can no longer see. So let's change our eyes. And so when do we stop being Homo sapiens? I mean, we've turned into Homo robotics. It's roboticus, something like that. I don't know. I don't have the Latin to tell you what kind of thing we're changing into. But when the technology changes us so that we can breathe the air that's no longer breathable by Homo sapiens, we become a different species. So if we don't go extinct, we'll change dramatically as human beings. And this is not just science fiction. We're talking about reality. We can see it if we open our eyes. And there are many people out there that you think they're sources of information, but they are not. They're not trying to inform you, they're trying to persuade you. So it takes work to get to the truth. And if you just say it's too much work and you throw your hands up, you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. Work to inform yourself. What is the truth? Because data is not information. Data has to be transformed into information, and by those who can. And if they're controlled by the government, it's up to the government to say what you know and what you don't know. And that can be a problem. So academia has to do the analysis and inform the government and to inform the industry of what we can do that's sustainable. Because if we don't take action, and yesterday is maybe too late, but today is the best we have, so do it today. Change our governments, our academics, and our industry in a way that it's cooperative and sustainable. And is this impossible to do? Oh, it's hard, incredibly difficult to do. But if we're all pulling the oars in the same direction, the boat will move, and we will. Every problem that we face, we will find a solution trailing right behind it. And if we're all working together to find it, we will. But if we're all pulling against each other in opposite directions, we won't. So change yourself first, cooperate. Don't think about the artificial boundaries that man puts on maps and atlases and globes. Think of the boundaries in nature that are mountains and rivers and oceans. Those are natural boundaries. There aren't any boundaries between people. They're all man-made. So man has had that consequence as well. Thanks again, Sharif, for an incredible show.
Thank you, Mr. Donald. I love to learn more. Even I'm sure it will be very helpful for the youth community and our audience. Number one, food. Number two, agriculture. What is the impact of climate change on food and agriculture? Uh, because even for Malaysia, this is very important.
That's a very interesting question. I hope you don't mind if I spend a very short time talking about sources of information. And what James said is true. There are organizations that are funded by the oil industry that on purpose obfuscate the situation. And they claim to be scientific organizations, and two of them that are especially bad are the Heartland Foundation, which is it's made to obfuscate the issues. Another one is the Heritage Foundation, which is completely funded by a family called the Koch brothers. And the Koch brothers are a giant oil consortium, privately owned, and they're libertarian, which means that they basically hate governments, and they're deliberately trying to undermine the governments and convince people that petroleum really isn't a problem. So that's a danger, because these places represent themselves as legitimate scientific organizations or legitimate organizations, but that's not what they're for. They're actually were founded by people with the deliberate intent of propaganda. And I'd like to say to everyone that I read a couple of magazines called Science and Nature, and you can discover how reliable a magazine is by looking at what's called its impact factor. And the impact factor is basically a number that tells how often the articles in that journal are cited. And if a journal is cited extremely high, like they have a high impact factor, and that generally means that people have looked at the articles and decided that they're accurate enough that they're going to use them as a reference in their paper. Science and Nature both are paywalled, but they both have a news thing. So they'll send you summaries of the articles that are in them for free. And I get that and I look at it every morning. And there was a fantastically interesting article just this week in Science about the difficulty of relying on trees to be able to absorb the carbon, to act as carbon sinks, to be able to start helping us. And their conclusion is that it won't work. We need to do more. Anyway, those are pieces of that. Agriculture is very interesting because there's several factors in it. One of them is, of course, water. And in California and other places in the west of the US and Canada, they're very fertile areas, and they grow wine, grapes, and in fact, California grows half the fruits and vegetables of the United States. And it's dependent on water from the mountains, the Sierra Nevada mountains, where traditionally every year it snows, and snow is a reservoir of water. And this year there's no snow, which is heavily impacting our agriculture, and it's very scary. I don't have an immediate solution for that, but I do know yesterday I was taking a walk and I saw they were using sprinklers to water crops. Well, sprinklers are basically shoot the water into the air, and as everyone's mentioned, we're having a heat wave problem. So they're basically shooting the water and evaporating quite a bit of it. And so different agricultural techniques that preserve water are useful. Another one that's interesting is pests. As it warms up, pests that traditionally get killed because of the cold are now surviving. And there's an interesting thing. There's a brown caterpillar in the East Coast whose range is growing. And if you touch one of them, it's like touching a nettle. They cause burns on you that are very, very painful. And even their little hairs blowing in the air can be inhaled and cause enough damage that sometimes people have to be hospitalized. And traditionally they're kept in check because the winters are so cold, it kills them all off. But now they're having winters that just aren't cold. And so there's other pests that directly relate to agriculture, like corn borers, and they're moving north into areas that they weren't able to survive before. So there's the issue of water. I will also say that water also can cause flooding. And I read the New York Times and Washington Post, and they both attributed the heat. They said it's 500 times as likely that we're going to have heat waves like the ones we're having on the West Coast now than it was. I'd like to recommend another source about oceans. And there's a thing called the Argo floats, and you can look them up, ARGO floats. And they basically are these floats. There's 4,000 of them in the world right now, about. And what they do is they sink a mile down into the ocean, and then they blow up a bladder that causes them float back to the surface, and then they dump, taking the temperature the whole way down and other measurements and the whole way back up. And then they shoot the data up to a satellite, and then they repeat that. And through those, we've learned that for absolute sure that sea level temperature is rising. And they're very interesting. There's some great websites on it, so I'd recommend looking that up. But back to what I was saying is that areas in the south of the United States are flooding so much that they're getting to the point that we can't grow things there anymore. It was always pretty bad land, and now it's getting worse. So I think for individuals, if you're like so poor you're not able to eat every day, or you're scrabbling to eat, me telling you that you should move to a safer place is probably, yeah, well, sure, I'd like to, but how am I going to do it? So what I can say is that in the end, governments, we are governed because we let it happen. And I mean, you look at Russia, Romania, all these countries, they took the leaders and shot them and created a new country. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, but it does happen. And the only way that we can really work this out is if countries work together. The rich countries have to help the poor countries. They have to help the people move. New agricultural products are being developed by giant seed companies like Monsanto. If you go to their website, they have a huge part on what they're doing to genetically modify food so that it can grow in harsher environment, in different environments. It's happening that we're developing new crops, but I am very worried that, there has been starvation. In Syria's civil war was partially caused by the farmers not being able to grow food anymore because of a drought that was happening that has been attributed to climate change. All over the world, it's already happening where people can't grow enough food, they can't live where they are. And again, we just all this as humans have to realize what's going on, and that's why I recommend good sources of information. So that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you. Madam Ali Rice, actually, you are representing women in this panel. I have interesting thoughts about climate change impact on women, especially gender issue also increasing. Even in the COVID-19 situation, glass ceiling factor also increasing. Many women actually affected. Even any kind of challenges come, actually, women has to face. Different experience. Even it's happened in developing nations in Asia Pacific and Africa, even Middle East. Even though in USA and Europe, I think that still they have a chance to improve these glass ceiling factors. So what do you want to add, the impact on women for climate change?
Yeah, the impact on women, because I think, well, as a mum and an entrepreneur as well, I would say that that the ecology of the world should be given priority over the economy of the world, and that we should prioritize our natural infrastructure and the natural resources we have. And that's where, I think COVID made us realize that health was really our wealth, and health in a broader sense, so the health of the environment and the spaces we live in. So essentially, we live in a rural area, we've got access to outside spaces. So fundamentally, my experience of living through COVID hasn't fundamentally changed in that I still walk the dog and I still can go shopping. So those two things have kept a semblance of normality to me that gives me access that otherwise, if you're in the middle of a city where there's nowhere to go, that's not the same, is it? So essentially, I think fundamentally the ecology of the world needs to be given a priority, and that would have ramifications on everything. So, it's anything that happens or anything that anyone does should fulfill a remit that's a win-win for, people shouldn't be able to pollute the air. And I don't understand why they would. When they have to breathe the air, they're going to pollute. So I don't, and fundamentally, I don't understand why people pollute water sources when fundamentally they've got to drink it. So I think fundamentally, there's fundamentals that we need to readdress the balance completely. And I think the David Suzuki Foundation, I don't know whether anyone knows about the David Suzuki Foundation, but I think he's a beacon of light and the way that we should look at the world as a whole, not just, it's because he's based in Vancouver, but his experience and the expertise that he's got with the people around him fundamentally demonstrates what we all should be doing wherever we are in the world. And and obviously some people in some places don't have any choice but to make the best of the resources they have locally. And that's the thing is, so essentially, but to be resourceful, it's worth banding together as a community so that you can solve the problems you face on a local level and then look at ways of doing it. And that's one of the good things, the fact that we're kind of all interconnected and also connected through technology, that if there's innovations that work in one space that faces the same problems, we can kind of showcase how to deal with things elsewhere. And it shouldn't be based on how much money you have. It should be based on how you manage to kind of deal with the problems that are facing you that are critical to living and and well-being on a day-to-day basis. So and obviously I don't live in a third world country. So I've been to Malaysia and I know how beautiful it is. I've been to the cities in Malaysia and I've also been in the countryside, and it's a stunning country. But the Malaysia that I visited is probably very different now because that was 20 years ago. So, so things change. And I think culturally, we don't know what other people face until we are on the ground and know, what. So essentially that knowledge is key. So you can't treat every single place in the world in the same way. You have to kind of know what the problems they're facing are. So, but I do think that the ecology of the world and those natural resources, I think one of the things that frustrates me is the Western world continually take and not steal, but that take advantage of the resources in other countries that aren't their own. And they go in and do, so I can never understand why they'd open new mines in India or China. But it's the Western world that's going in and creating jobs and doing that. And, we need to stop because it's not workable and it's stupid. Essentially, it's not the way to go. So for me, it's about really keying into to making good choices that are, healthy for everybody and don't have a negative impact on anyone. So their ideal solution and genetically modifying food is just crazy as far as I can see. Because as far as I know, Monsanto's genetically engineered food is carcinogenic and causes health problems. So I don't think somebody should give somebody some kind of an award for creating something that feeds. If you wouldn't feed your own children whatever you create, you shouldn't be creating it for anybody. That's my that's my viewpoint. So I don't think. So I think people need to question that, the delivery of the way they do things and the quality of what's produced as well. So I worry about the chemicals that are put on the land and on our food here. So I'm kind of a purist in that way. But definitely the ecology of the planet needs to be preserved and protected. That's still there, so that we can kind of and over here I think we're planting millions of trees. I think the Queen and the Prince of Wales, and there's like millions and millions of trees that are being planted in the UK in the next few years. So that's one thing that's going kind of in the good direction. But there's so much. My idea of development isn't seeing acres and acres of woodland or forest taken away. So, but for other people it is. So maybe we should change the way that we think progress should look.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really, really great discussion because for these climate change issues, we get different aspects from scientific point of view, from practical point of views, even from the gender issues. This will be very, very helpful for our youth communities, for our policymaker, and for our corporation. I directly want to go for this concluding remarks for today. Before that, I request everyone to share our content as much as possible. And if you have a new speakers, those who want to join in World Talent Economy Forums, and based on basically we do more focus on different kind of modern science, engineering and technology and climate change. So those who are interested, they can join in World Talent Economy Forum. Then I request our audience share our content as much as possible with government, with corporations, as well as with your academia. So Mr. Paul, what is the concluding remarks for today?
Excuse me. Yes, I think that the climate problem is so enormous that it needs to be attacked from many different sides. So, as young students sort of going through their country's school systems and learning online and trying to figure out what they want to do. If they want to make a difference in the world or how they want to make a difference in the world, then each person has sort of individual personal passions and develop skills. And generally, if you're passionate about something and you really like something, then you tend to do better at it. You tend to think about things more deeply in a particular field and, excel in that field. I mean, we're a niche-based society, so, people get very, very specialized, and I think people get over-specialized, and, their focus is only on one particular field. For their career or whatever. So I think I encourage people to, even if they do become extremely specialized, that they kind of keep an open mind and always try to think of the big picture and how what they're doing relates to the big picture. So, there's many different ways to tackle or make a dent into climate change and to try to make a more sustainable world, or adapt to the changes that are coming, etc. So, people often ask me, what's the thing that I can do best to chip away at the climate change problem, and I always tell them invariably that that's the only person that can answer that question is yourself. Get a basic understanding of climate and how everything is changing, and what we know. A lot of us know what we need to do, and then just pick a field that you're really interested in and start working away at it. Or whatever job you end up doing, whatever career you end up doing, you can have an influence in that career. If you go and work for a large corporation and they don't have they don't have a climate change plan or a climate change strategy, then you can set up a new department with a few other people, like-minded people in that organization, and get something going. There's always something that we can do. So never feel helpless that you can't make any impact or affect any change.
Mhm. Thank you, Mr. Jamsid. What are the concluding remarks for today?
Thank you, Sharif. Great show, incredibly important topic. Really learned, taking notes. And anybody who's watching, I don't know if you can see this, but I take notes, and I try to stay informed as much as possible. But I've learned something on every show that you've done because of the quality of the speakers that you assemble. And there's a couple of things. I don't want Ali to be the only person speaking for females. If you remember Y2K, there was a tremendous concern leading to panic that when the clocks turned to 2000, all the computer systems would fail. And you found, interestingly enough, my wife pointed this out to me because she was the CIO. All of a sudden, right before the year 2000, the number of female CIOs grew at an astounding rate. They were a small percentage before, and right before 2000, they were approaching half the CIOs were women. And why was that? Because men thought that this was going to be a catastrophic problem and a giant headache, and they wanted it to get away from it. They wanted to escape the consequences. So they promoted women into the jobs so they would be the ones that would be the scapegoats. So this is the thing that we have to guard against. Scapegoats, fear-based decision-making will always be suboptimal. And when you want to get informed, take responsibility. Don't be passive. If you're passive, you're just another brick in the wall, and you're just going to learn what they tell you. Find out what are the valuable sources of information. Not necessarily data, unless you're qualified yourself to analyze the data, but the people providing the information that do the work of analyzing the data and provide you with good information. So start with yourself, inform yourself, find the sources of information that are trustworthy, and learn from them. Take notes when people who have done the work that you haven't done are talking. And this is the kind of thing that has helped me throughout my life, knowing that I don't know it all. So that, and everybody that speaks has some level of expertise, and they have some blind spots. They're not seeing the whole picture. Nobody can. Nobody does. So have a level of humility, but also have confidence in yourself, as Paul was saying. And take this to, if you can invest money, And you think, well, I don't have millions of dollars to invest. Well, if 5 people invest in a fossil, $1 million in a fossil fuel company, you know, that's a lot of money, right? Well, what about if 1 million people invested $5 in a green company? That has the exact same effect. So we don't want to talk to millionaires, we want to talk to millions. And we want to persuade millions to do the right thing with their own lives, make changes in their own lives that help the planet to remain sustainable. You know, and don't build walls. We've got plenty of walls. Tear them down, build bridges instead. You know, because we're in this together, we've got to work together to solve these problems. They're complicated problems. But if governments, industry, and academia can work together, we can solve them. I have optimism that these problems can be solved, but not one person alone, not one government alone, not one researcher alone, and not one factory alone. You know, we're all got to pitch in, and we've all got to do our part. So do yours. Starting yesterday if you could, but you can't, so start today. Change your life. Eat less meat, you know, invest in green companies, you know, drive an electric car. If you have these options, change something about what you're doing, and then talk to others in your sphere of influence. Thanks again, Sharif. Very important.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Donald, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I want to say right off, it's not the GMOs themselves that are carcinogenic. It's that they use this thing glyphosate, which is also called Roundup. And what they've done is they've made plants that are immune to Roundup, which kills weeds. And it's the Roundup that might be carcinogenic. It's probable enough that we think that it is. And but the plants themselves aren't carcinogenic. It's the way that it's used in conjunction with pesticides. I also want to mention 2 sources. Skeptical Science is a fabulous website for learning about climate change. It has nothing but links to top quality journals, and it has very, very good information that's well presented. Another one that I subscribe to is a weekly newsletter from a place called Yale Climate Connection, and that's put out by Yale University. And it's really worth taking a look at. One thing that we can all do, kind of echoing something that Jim has said, is that we can look personally at some of the sources of the problems. So for an instance, Malaysia was once the leading producer of palm oil, and now it's the second producer of palm oil. And in order to do that, they have to clear some of Malaysia's wonderful rainforests where 20% of all animals on Earth live. That's an incredible number. And the biggest flower in the world is in Malaysia's rainforests. So every time you eat palm oil, you're paying to cut some of the beautiful rainforests of Malaysia down. That's what you're doing. And so you can look at the ingredients to the food that you eat and find food that's safer, that isn't hurting people. Like, I would never eat anything with palm oil, and they use it for bad food like cookies and things like that you shouldn't eat anyway. So I'm just echoing what others have said, that that you have sources to be able to inform yourself and understand what's going on, and then from them you can make choices in your life. When I said that there was a plan, the Delta 2100 plan for Bangladesh, that it worked with Dutch, as I said, a Dutch organization. How do you get a job working for an organization like that? What do you do when you're working with an organization? You can actually get paid for helping make a difference. And so in order to do that, you have to know enough about what it is that you're trying to do to be, to get hired. And so take the sources that I've mentioned and spend some time looking at them and start thinking a little bit about how you, if you want to, how you could do something that really makes a difference and earn a living at it. And even if you can't, you can make choices that will help make the world better by not destroying parts of the world. So that's what I have to say. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you.
As
Thank you.
always, it's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Ali, what's your concluding remarks today?
I still go back to what I said, that we need to change the way we fundamentally do things. And in May this year, we have a G7 summit in Cornwall in England. And one of the sad things is that despite those the talks that they had, they're still committed to fossil fuels and the corporations that. So I don't know how, but in some way we need to kind of change the way that we live, so we're not as reliant and not, and live more sustainably in the way that we do things. And I do think raising awareness with our young people and our children it's definitely my children and what they care about impacts me. So essentially, I think raising awareness to young people and students so that they impact the people around them to do things differently is one way to go. But governmentally, there still needs to be leverage to make the bigger moves on, in industry. And I think the human potential is incredible, but not the human potential in artificial intelligence. The human potential to figure out solutions is amazing. And I think this generation was probably the generation that's going to solve the problems that we can't see the solutions to in a very fundamental way that we can't see as well. So I think instead of being a lost generation, this generation probably can see where we can remedy the things that that we're trying to resolve. So and the ecology and the natural health of the planet on a whole matters to all of us. So that's fundamentally, the air we breathe and the water we drink needs to be clean. That's fundamental to everyone. And you can't, if you're not healthy, and there's no way, COVID's affected the well-being of people and the mental health of people in the Western world so much that some people feel like they can't do anything. They barely go out of their houses. So, we need to get back to some kind of grounded self-assurance that we're okay, because the propaganda of fear is also a massive impact on people, and there's nothing to be scared of. We just need to move forward and figure out how we resolve the bigger, and the problem is that we're not living sustainably, and that's what we need to do.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is really helpful for World Talent Economy Forum and for our audience. Thank you for joining today's session, and thank you for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you, Professor Paul, Mr. James Head, Professor Donalds, Madam Ali Rice, for joining today's session. Bye bye and take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.